Close your eyes and imagine you're lying in bed. Everyone else is asleep. It's been a busy day, so you're very tired. Outside your bedroom window, the night is so dark and quiet that you can hear the whisper of the wind through the trees. You're just about to drift off to sleep when you hear something in the distance. You hear the pounding of hooves and the clatter of a horse galloping down the road. It's too late for someone to be riding. You jump to your feet and look out the window. You see a man in the cloak racing down the road on horseback. He's moving very fast. He pulls to a halt, jumps off his horse, and pounds on your door. Your father in the other room answers the door. "The British are coming," the man yells. "The British are coming." Your father hurries to the next room to pull on his coat and grab his musket. This thrilling night ride, known as Paul Revere's ride, and the battles that followed in Lexington and Concord, which marked the beginning of a fight for freedom that would change the world. It was April 18th, 1775, and the American colonies were growing increasingly frustrated with British rule. The colonies had been under British control for many years, and the colonists were unhappy with the British government. The colonies were on the brink of revolution, or overthrowing the government. The British had already started sending troops to keep order, and the colonists were preparing for what they feared would be a big fight for their freedom. The American colonies had formed local militias, groups of volunteer soldiers who were ready to defend their homes and families. These militias were spread out across the colonies, and they were secretly preparing for the possibility of a battle. In April 1775, the British decided to take action to disarm the militias and seize their weapons. They planned to march to the town of Concord, Massachusetts, where the colonists had stored a large amount of gunpowder and weapons. The news of this British plan spread quickly, and the Patriots, as the colonists who were fighting for independence were called, needed to act fast. One of the most famous figures of this time was Paul Revere. Paul was a silversmith, which means he crafted things out of silver, such as eating utensils, cups, bowls, and other necessary items. Revere was also a member of the Sons of Liberty, a group that was working to resist British rule. Revere was known for his bravery and his commitment to the cause of independence. He was chosen for a special mission that night, to ride through the countryside and warn the colonists that the British were coming. The Sons of Liberty knew the British would attack, but there was a question of whether they would attack by land, by marching, or by sea, by using ships to move them. The Patriots watching the troops decided they would send a signal if the attack was by land or sea. If the British decided to attack by land, they would put one lamp high up in the window of the Old North Church. If the British decided to attack by sea, they would put two lamps in the church. When Paul Revere saw one lamp in the Old North Church, his job was to ride his horse through nearby towns to let them know to prepare to fight. Revere set out from Boston in the middle of the night, armed with a message to spread the word about the British plan. He rode through the towns of Lexington and Concord, shouting to the people and warning them to get ready. His famous ride was not just a quick dash, it was a race against time to get the message out before the British arrived. Revere wasn't the only rider that night. Another man, William Dawes, also rode out to warn the colonists. Dawes took a different route and helped to spread the alarm. There was also a third rider, Samuel Prescott, who joined the ride later and helped to carry the message even further. Together, these men played a crucial role in making sure that the Patriots had the information they needed to prepare for the coming battle. The ride of Paul Revere and his fellow riders was a huge success. Thanks to their efforts, the colonists were ready when the British troops arrived. The British soldiers, led by Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, began their march towards Concord in the early hours of April 19th. They were confident that they would be able to quickly seize the weapons and return to Boston without much trouble. But the Patriots were prepared. The first clash happened in the town of Lexington, where a small group of American militiamen, known as Minutemen, were waiting for the British. The Minutemen were called that because they were ready to fight in a minute's notice. As the British troops approached Lexington Green, a small field in the center of town, a tense standoff took place. The British soldiers and the Minutemen faced off, and a single shot rang out. This shot, known as the shot heard round the world, marked the beginning of the American Revolution. The skirmish at Lexington was brief, but it showed the British that the colonists were willing to stand up and fight for their rights. After the fight in Lexington, the British troops continued their march to Concord. When they arrived in Concord, they found that many of the weapons and supplies they had hoped to take had already been moved to safety. Thanks to Paul Revere and the other writers, the colonists had been warned in time and had taken action to protect their weapons and ammo. In Concord, another battle took place as the British soldiers tried to search for and destroy what was left of the weapons. The fighting continued, and the Patriots fought bravely to defend their homes and their cause. As the British troops began to retreat back to Boston, they were harassed and attacked by the American militias along the way. The journey back to Boston was much more difficult and dangerous than the march out had been. The battles of Lexington and Concord were important for many reasons. First, they marked the start of the American Revolution, a war that would last several years and lead to the independence of the American colonies. The battles showed that the colonists were not afraid to stand up to the British and that they were willing to fight for their freedom. Second, the battles showed the strength of the American militias. Despite being outnumbered and facing a well-trained British army, the Patriots were able to hold their ground and make a strong stand. This early success boosted the morale of the colonists and inspired many more people to join the fight for independence. Third, the events of April 19, 1775, helped to unite the colonies in their struggle against British rule. The news of the battle spread quickly, and people across the colonies began to rally behind the cause of independence. The battles of Lexington and Concord helped to solidify the determination of the Patriots and set the stage for the ongoing fight for freedom. Today, the legacy of Paul Revere's ride and the battles of Lexington and Concord is celebrated in many ways. April 19th is remembered as Patriots' Day in Massachusetts, and there are events and activities that honor the bravery of the people who fought for independence. The story of Paul Revere's ride is often taught in schools and remembered in poems and songs, including the famous poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that describes Revere's midnight ride. If you search our podcast or YouTube, you can find a reading of this poem. The bravery and determination shown by Paul Revere, the Minutemen, and the Patriots who fought in the battles continue to inspire people today. The idea of standing up for what you believe in and fighting for your rights is a powerful lesson that remains relevant in modern times. In addition, the battles of Lexington and Concord are remembered for their role in shaping American identity and values. The fight for independence and the courage of the people involved have become symbols of freedom and resilience. The spirit of the American Revolution is reflected in the principles of democracy and liberty that are central to American society today. Paul Revere's ride and the battles of Lexington and Concord were important moments in American history. Paul Revere's courageous ride to warn the colonists and the battles that followed marked the beginning of the American Revolution. The bravery of the Patriots and their determination to fight for their freedom played a big role in shaping the future of the United States. Imagine a grassy hill overlooking a busy city. You hear drums in the distance, and smoke from musket fire fills the air. Soldiers in red coats march forward, while others behind a wall of dirt get ready to defend their ground. This may sound like a scene from a movie, but it really happened more than 200 years ago. It was one of the first major battles of the American Revolution. It's called the Battle of Bunker Hill, and it showed just how brave and determined the American colonists really were. The battle took place on June 17, 1775, during a time when the American colonies were fighting for freedom from British rule. For many years, the colonies had been controlled by the King of England and his government. The colonists were tired of unfair taxes and laws. They wanted the right to make their own choices. This led to protests, arguments, and finally, war. The fighting had already begun in April 1775 at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Those were the first real clashes between British soldiers and colonial fighters known as patriots. After that, both sides prepared for more battles. One of the most important places in this fight was the city of Boston, Massachusetts. Boston was surrounded by hills, and both sides knew whoever controlled the hills would have the advantage. Two of these hills were called Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill. The colonists planned to build a fort on Bunker Hill, but they ended up building it on Breed's Hill instead, which was a little closer to Boston. On the night of June 16th, about 1,000 American soldiers quietly marched to Breed's Hill. They worked through the night, digging trenches and building walls to protect themselves. Their leader was Colonel William Prescott, a strong and serious man who helped prepare them for the fight ahead. The next morning, British General William Howe saw the American fort and decided to attack. The British had more soldiers, better weapons, and were trained fighters. But the Americans had something powerful too. They were fighting to protect their homes and their freedom. As the British soldiers marched up the hill, Colonel Prescott gave a famous order to his men. "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." He wanted them to wait until the enemy was close, so they wouldn't waste any bullets. The Patriots followed this order, and when the British got close, they fired with great accuracy. The British attacked the hill 3 times. Each time, they were met with strong resistance. The Patriots were low on supplies and had very little gunpowder, but they didn't give up easily. They stood their ground and fought bravely. Eventually, the Americans ran out of ammunition and had to retreat. The British took the hill, but it came at a great cost. Even though the British won the hill, they lost over 1,000 soldiers, while the Patriots lost far fewer. This battle showed that the American colonists were serious about fighting for their independence. The British learned that defeating them would not be easy. The Battle of Bunker Hill was important for several reasons. First, it showed that the Patriots were willing to fight hard, even against one of the most powerful armies in the world. Second, it gave the colonists hope. They didn't win the battle, but they had proven their strength and courage. Many important people were part of this battle. General Israel Putnam was another American leader who helped organize the defense. He was known for his bravery and experience. Another key figure was Dr. Joseph Warren, a young leader and doctor who had helped plan the early resistance against British rule. He fought in the battle and was sadly killed during the fighting. His sacrifice became a symbol of dedication to the Patriot cause. Although the battle took place on Breed's Hill, it became known as the Battle of Bunker Hill. Today, people remember it as a turning point in the early days of the American Revolution. It showed the world that the colonists were ready to stand up for their freedom, even if it meant risking everything. You can still visit the site of the battle today in Charlestown, Massachusetts, where a tall stone monument called the Bunker Hill Monument stands. It honors the brave men who fought there and reminds us of their courage. Inside nearby museums, you can see uniforms, weapons, and maps from the time of the battle. The story of Bunker Hill reminds us that change doesn't always come easy. It takes hard work, strong belief, and sometimes great sacrifice. The colonists didn't win that day, but they won something even bigger: the belief that independence was possible. The Battle of Bunker Hill is now a powerful symbol of bravery and the fight for freedom. It teaches us about the strength of standing up for what is right, even when the odds are against you. The people who fought that day helped light the path toward the creation of a new nation, the United States of America. Imagine you're in a small wooden boat on a freezing river. It's the middle of the night and snow is falling. The wind is blowing hard and the icy water splashes into the boat. You can't see much, but you can hear the sound of oars cutting through the water. You look to your left and see a tall man standing at the front of another boat. He's wearing a heavy cloak, and his face is calm but serious. That man is General George Washington. You're crossing the Delaware River with him on one of the most daring missions of the American Revolution. The year is 1776, and things are not going well for the American Army. Just months ago, on July 4th, the colonies had declared independence from Britain. But now, after many battles, the Americans had lost most of them. Washington's army was tired, cold, and running out of hope. Many soldiers didn't have proper shoes or coats. Some were sick. Others were ready to give up and go home. The British had taken over New York and had chased Washington's army across New Jersey. By December, Washington and his men were camped on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware River. Across the river, in Trenton, New Jersey, were German soldiers called Hessians. They were hired by the British and were guarding the town. Washington knew he had to do something big to keep the fight going. If he didn't, the war might be lost. He came up with a bold plan. He would cross the icy Delaware River on Christmas night, surprise the Hessians the next morning, and win a battle. The plan was risky. The weather was terrible and the river was full of chunks of ice. But Washington believed it was the only chance to turn the war around. He gathered about 2,400 men. They would use boats called Durham boats, which were strong enough to carry soldiers, horses, and cannons. On the night of December 25th, 1776, the men got ready. It was cold, dark, and snowing. The soldiers wrapped blankets around themselves. Some walked barefoot through the snow. As the boats pushed off into the river, they had to fight strong currents and freezing winds. Some of the boats got stuck, but the men kept going. Washington was in one of the first boats to cross. He stayed calm and encouraged his men. Everyone knew this was important. They were quiet, trying not to alert the enemy on the other side. It took hours to get across. By the time all the soldiers had crossed, it was almost dawn. They still had to march 9 miles in the snow to reach Trenton. The men were tired, but they kept walking. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, the American army reached Trenton. The Hessian soldiers were surprised. They had been celebrating Christmas the night before and were not expecting an attack. Many of them were still asleep. The Americans moved quickly. They blocked the roads and surrounded the town. After only about an hour of fighting, the Hessians surrendered. Washington and his army had won. It was a small battle, but it meant a lot. The Americans captured almost 1,000 enemy soldiers. Only a few American soldiers were killed or hurt. The victory gave new hope to Washington's army and to people all over the colonies. Before the crossing, many people thought the war might be lost. After the victory at Trenton, they believed again. More men joined the army. Washington's bold move had changed everything. A few days later, Washington crossed the Delaware River again and won another battle at Princeton. These victories helped keep the American Revolution alive. Today, the story of Washington crossing the Delaware is one of the most famous moments in American history. There's even a famous painting of it, showing Washington standing in the boat with ice all around. While the painting doesn't show everything exactly right, it helps people remember the courage and strength of that night. Washington's bravery and the courage of his soldiers teach us that even when things look bad, we can still fight for what we believe in. They didn't give up, even in the freezing cold, even when the enemy was stronger. That night on the Delaware River, ordinary people did something extraordinary, and because of that, the dream of a free country stayed alive. Imagine a cold winter morning. Snow covers the ground, and your breath turns to mist in the air. You're a young soldier wrapped in a worn coat, your feet sore from marching. You haven't had much food to eat, and your hands are cold and red. All around you are other soldiers, tired, hungry, and hoping for better days. But even in this hard time, you hear a voice encouraging you to stay strong. That voice belongs to General George Washington, and the place is called Valley Forge. Valley Forge was not a battle. It was a winter camp for the American army during the Revolutionary War. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, General Washington and his soldiers stopped there to rest, train, and survive. Even though there were no cannons firing or enemies attacking, the time at Valley Forge became one of the most important parts of America's fight for independence. The war had started in 1775, and by late 1777, things were not going well for the American soldiers. They had lost several battles, and the British had taken control of Philadelphia, the American capital at the time. General Washington needed a safe place to keep his army during the winter months. He chose Valley Forge, a place about 20 miles from Philadelphia, where he could keep an eye on the British, but also stay far enough away to rest. When the soldiers arrived at Valley Forge in December, they faced terrible conditions. It was cold, snowy, and muddy. Many of the soldiers didn't have proper clothes or shoes. Some wrapped their feet in cloth, while others walked barefoot through the snow. Food was hard to find, and there weren't enough blankets or tents. Some soldiers built small huts out of logs to keep warm, but the huts were crowded and uncomfortable. The army was hungry and tired. Illness spread quickly, and many soldiers got sick with diseases like smallpox and fever. More than 2,000 soldiers died that winter, not from fighting, but from hunger, cold, and disease. Still, most of the army stayed. They believed in what they were fighting for: freedom and a better future. At the heart of Valley Forge was George Washington. He stayed with his men the whole time. He visited their huts, listened to their worries, and tried to bring them hope. Even though he was a general, he never acted like he was better than the soldiers. He knew they were all part of the same fight. Washington also worked hard to get help. He sent letters asking for food, clothes, and medicine. Slowly supplies began to arrive. Then something amazing happened. A man named Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a soldier from Prussia, a country in Europe, arrived at Valley Forge. He offered to help train the army. Von Steuben didn't speak much English, but he knew how to turn a group of tired, untrained fighters into a real army. He taught them how to march in rows, use their weapons better, and follow clear commands. His training made a big difference. The soldiers trained even in the snow, with their muskets and bayonets. They learned to work together and became stronger each day. What had once been a group of farmers and shopkeepers was now turning into a skilled fighting force. By the time spring arrived, the army at Valley Forge was ready. When the army marched out of Valley Forge in June 1778, they stood tall and proud. They were better trained, better organized, and full of new hope. The time at Valley Forge had been hard, but it had also brought them closer together. They had survived the cold, the hunger, and the sickness, and they were ready to keep fighting for independence. Valley Forge became a symbol of strength, courage, and determination. It showed the world that the American army would not give up, even in the hardest times. It also showed the power of leadership. George Washington's care and bravery helped keep the army together when things looked dark. Today you can visit Valley Forge National Historical Park in Pennsylvania. There you can see the place where the soldiers built their huts, walked through snow, and trained in the cold. Statues and signs help tell the story of what happened there. People visit to honor the men who stayed, trained, and believed in something bigger than themselves. Valley Forge teaches us an important lesson. Sometimes the hardest moments help us grow the most. Even when things are tough, we can be brave, work together, and keep going. The soldiers at Valley Forge didn't give up, and because of that, they helped win the war and build a new country. The story of Valley Forge is not just about soldiers and war. It's about never losing hope, even when things seem impossible. It's about believing in a better future and working hard to make it real. Imagine marching through the forest in the fall, the leaves crunching under your feet. The air is cool, and smoke from campfires rises through the trees. You are part of an army fighting for your country's freedom. Ahead, a great battle is about to begin, one that will change the course of the American Revolution. This is the Battle of Saratoga, one of the most important victories for the American colonists during their fight for independence. The year was 1777. The American colonies were at war with Great Britain. The colonists, also known as patriots, wanted to be free and rule themselves. But the British king didn't want to lose control of the colonies. The war had started in 1775, and now both sides were fighting hard. The British had a new plan. They wanted to take control of New York and split the colonies in half. If they could do that, they thought it would be easier to beat the Patriots. A British general named John Burgoyne came up with a plan to march his army from Canada down through New York to meet other British forces coming from different directions. Together they would surround and crush the American army. General Burgoyne had over 7,000 British and German soldiers, and they began their march through the thick forests of northern New York. But the journey was harder than they thought. The American army, led by General Horatio Gates, knew the land well. They slowed the British down by cutting down trees and blocking paths. Burgoyne's army also ran low on supplies and food. They were getting tired and hungry. As the British army struggled forward, the Americans prepared to stop them near a place called Saratoga. There in September and October of 1777, two big battles took place. The First Battle of Saratoga happened on September 19th. The British attacked, and the fighting was tough. The American soldiers, hiding behind trees and walls, fired at the British as they tried to move forward. One important American officer was Benedict Arnold, who helped lead attacks and encourage the soldiers. The British won that battle, but just barely, and they lost many men. Over the next few weeks, the Americans got stronger. More and more soldiers joined their side. The British, still stuck in the forest and far from help, began to worry. Their supplies were almost gone, and their soldiers were tired. Then on October 7th, the second battle began. This time, the Americans were ready. They attacked the British and pushed them back. Benedict Arnold, even though he had been told not to fight, rushed into battle and helped lead the charge. He was brave and fierce, even getting wounded in the leg. The Americans won the battle, and the British were forced to retreat. Just 10 days later, on October 17th, 1777, General Burgoyne had no choice. His army was trapped. With no food, no backup, and no way to escape, he surrendered to the American forces. Over 5,000 British soldiers gave up that day. It was a huge victory for the Patriots. The Battle of Saratoga was more than just a win on the battlefield. It changed the course of the entire war. People in the American colonies were filled with hope and pride. For the first time, it seemed like they really could win their independence from Britain. But the victory did something even bigger. It convinced France to join the war on the side of the Americans. France had been watching the war and wanted to help, but they didn't want to support a losing side. After Saratoga, they saw that the Americans had a real chance to win. France sent ships, soldiers, and money. Their help made a big difference later in the war. So many important people played a role in the Battle of Saratoga. General Horatio Gates led the American forces, and although he got much of the credit, Benedict Arnold was one of the true heroes of the battle. Later, Arnold sadly became a traitor to the American cause, but at Saratoga, he fought bravely. Another key leader was Daniel Morgan, who led a group of skilled riflemen from Virginia. They were excellent sharpshooters and helped defeat the British at just the right time. Today, the Saratoga National Historical Park stands where the battles happened. People visit to learn about the soldiers who fought, the decisions that were made, and how this one victory helped shape American history. The Battle of Saratoga teaches us that courage, teamwork, and determination can make a big difference. Even when things seemed difficult, the American soldiers didn't give up. They used what they had, worked together, and believed in their cause. It also reminds us that sometimes one important moment can change everything. Saratoga was that moment in the American Revolution. It gave hope to the colonies, brought new allies, and helped turn the dream of freedom into a real possibility. Close your eyes and imagine the early morning fog rolling over a wide, grassy field. The air is cool, and the sound of footsteps crunching on dirt fills the quiet. Rows of soldiers in worn coats stand ready, their muskets resting on their shoulders. Off in the distance, the boom of a cannon echoes, shaking the ground. The soldiers glance nervously at each other, gripping their weapons tightly. Today could change everything. The fight for freedom has led them here, to Yorktown. Nearby, a young drummer boy named Samuel stands with his drum strapped to his chest. His heart pounds as he listens for orders. He's only 12, but he knows his beats will signal the soldiers when to march and when to fire. Around him, tents flutter in the breeze, and campfires burn low. Soldiers sharpen bayonets and check their powder. Samuel wonders if he'll be brave enough when the battle begins. He takes a deep breath and taps his drum softly, steadying his nerves. This was the scene at the Battle of Yorktown, a major event in American history that took place in 1781. Picture a small, quiet town in Virginia becoming the stage for a huge battle that would decide the future of a new country. This battle was so important that it led to the end of the American Revolution and changed the course of history forever. The American Revolution was a long and difficult fight for the 13 colonies that wanted to be free from British rule. The war had been going on for several years, with many battles fought and much hardship endured. By the summer of 1781, the war was nearing a turning point, and the British forces were in a tight spot. The British Army, led by General Cornwallis, was stationed in a town called Yorktown, which was on the coast of Virginia. Yorktown was an important strategic location for the British. It had a harbor where British ships could dock their ships, and it was well fortified with defenses to protect the troops. General Cornwallis thought he was in a good position to defend his troops, and possibly even win the war. However, the American and French forces had a different plan that would change everything. On the American side, the leader of the Continental Army was General George Washington, who was known for his strong leadership and bravery. Washington was determined to bring the war to a successful end, and had been working hard to work with his allies. One of the most important allies was France, which had been providing support to the American cause. The French General Marquis de Lafayette was an important figure in the fight against the British. Lafayette was young, but had proven himself to be a skilled and courageous leader. He worked closely with Washington and played a crucial role in the fight against Cornwallis. The American and French forces had a plan to trap General Cornwallis and his army in Yorktown. They wanted to cut off his escape routes and force him to surrender. To do this, Washington and Lafayette planned to surround Yorktown and block the British from getting supplies or reinforcements. In September 1781, the American and French troops began their approach towards Yorktown. The combined forces included over 16,000 soldiers. They built bases, set up cannons, and prepared for a big siege. A siege is a type of military operation where forces surround a place to cut off supplies and force those inside to surrender. The British troops in Yorktown were not expecting such a large and well-planned force. As the siege began, the American and French forces gradually closed in on the town, laying siege to it from all sides. The British soldiers were now trapped and couldn't receive the supplies or reinforcements they needed. This made their situation very difficult. During the siege, the Americans and French launched a series of attacks on the British defenses. The troops worked tirelessly to build forts. They fired cannons and muskets, trying to weaken the British defenses and force them into a position where they would have to surrender. The British, led by General Cornwallis, tried their best to defend their position, but were facing a strong enemy. The siege lasted for several weeks, and the situation became more desperate for the British. On October 14, 1781, the Americans and French launched a decisive attack on the British defenses. This attack was led by American General Alexander Hamilton, who was known for his bravery and leadership. Hamilton and his troops managed to capture an important British defense, which was a significant blow to Cornwallis' forces. As the battle continued, it became clear that the British were running out of options. The American and French forces were closing in and had almost completely surrounded Yorktown. Cornwallis realized that his situation was hopeless and began to consider surrendering. The British troops were tired, low on supplies, and surrounded on all sides. On October 19, 1781, General Cornwallis made the decision to surrender. This was a huge moment in the American Revolution. The British soldiers, along with Cornwallis, marched out of Yorktown and laid down their arms. The American and French forces celebrated their victory as a major milestone in the fight for independence. The surrender at Yorktown effectively ended the American Revolution. It was the final major battle of the war and marked a turning point that led to American independence. After Yorktown, peace negotiations began, and the British government eventually agreed to the Treaty of Paris in 1783. This treaty officially recognized the independence of the United States and ended the war. The Battle of Yorktown is remembered for its importance in achieving American independence. It was a moment when the hard work, bravery, and determination of the American and French forces paid off. The victory at Yorktown showed that the American colonies were capable of defeating one of the world's most powerful armies and securing their freedom. Today, Yorktown is a historic site, and visitors can learn about the battle and its significance at the Yorktown battlefield. There are monuments and museums that honor the heroes of the battle and provide insights into this crucial moment in history. The impact of Yorktown extends beyond just the historical significance. The bravery and teamwork displayed during the battle are important lessons that continue to inspire people today. The idea of working together to achieve a common goal and standing up for one's beliefs is a powerful message that resonates in many aspects of life. The Battle of Yorktown also highlights the importance of alliances and cooperation. The collaboration between the American and French forces was important in winning. This lesson in teamwork and support is also found in sports, big projects, and even government. The victory at Yorktown remains a symbol of hope and determination. It reminds us that even in hard times, hard work and teamwork can lead to success. The courage of the soldiers and the leadership of figures like George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette continue to be celebrated as examples of excellence and dedication.